Benjamin,
What's going on?
good morning, young man.
Good morning. How are you guys?
Hey, Ben, good morning.
Glad we was able to get you up this early.
I got up an hour ago, kind of. Good morning.
Okay, we're going to get started, guys.
Hey, Ben, good morning.
So welcome everyone to this year's Black History Month event.
Look this early.
High school principal Grauer here, and I want to welcome everybody to our event today and remind us that Black history is our nation's story and we all share in it. Whether you're watching this live or you're viewing this later on, we're really glad you joined us. We normally would be doing something together in person, but because of the times, we have opted to carry out this event virtually. You will notice that there is a live and ongoing chat, which we'll be monitoring closely. Please put your questions out there, as well as Mr. Pinckney, our guest. He'll be putting some things out there as well. Regardless, this is an extremely fortunate time to have a special guest here today with us. And at this time, it's my pleasure to introduce 8th grade MRH middle school student, Miss Naya Davis, who will introduce our guest of honor.
Hello, everyone. My name is Naya Davis, and I am an 8th grade student at MRH Middle School. Today, I have the honor of introducing Mr. Wilford Pinkman Jr. Wilford Pinkman Jr. is the Mayor's Officer Director of Children, Youth, and Families with the signature purpose of making sure St. Louis children have the support and resources needed to lead productive and successful lives. He has worked in the criminal justice sector promoting safety, education, policy department, and training for over 28 years. He served for 20 years as a member of the New York City Police Department and is founder and CEO of Poissons Management and Consulting LLC, which helps organizations create successful strategies and plans. He was the chairperson of the School of Criminal Justice at Monroe College, where he taught public policy. Prior to joining the Admiral mission, Pinkney was a Fuse Executive Fellow, leading a cross-sector group of stakeholders in the Department of Comprehensive Pretrial Reform Plans in the city of St. Louis. Pinkney holds a BS in Organizational Management from the Mercy College, a Master's in Public Administration from New York University, and a Master's of Art in Policy Science from the CUNY Graduating Center. He is currently a doctoral candidate in policy science at the CUNY Graduating Center, where he specializes in public policy and American politics. Please welcome Mr. Wilford Pinkney.
Thank you, Naya. Thank you very much. It was excellent. I don't like hearing about myself. So thank you very much. I want to talk with you today, not to you. So I'm a very practical person. This is really a conversation. And Naya, started us off great, and I'll throw some questions in there. But I guess I'll start with words are important. And this is Black History Month, right? So this is a time to me when Black history is American history. We shouldn't be restraining it to just a month, but this is a time for us to sort of step back and remember our history and shared experience, and also to sort of take a moment to think about what our progress has been. So I'm going to share my screen. I just put together a couple of slides. They're really mostly visuals and quotes because I am a person that believes in words. And I'm going to talk about myself while the slide is up, and my path, my journey, right? Because we all have a journey, and oftentimes it's tough when you're hearing from someone old like me to understand how our journeys may connect. But I think our journeys and how our journeys do connect also help us think about the progress we made. So you'll see on the screen, this is Black History Month. Maya Angelou is, an important figure in our history. And this was something that caught my eye that I thought was relevant to our conversation today and to me talking about how I grew up, right? The Black child must learn early to allow laughter to fill his or her mouth, or the million small cruelties that they encounter will congeal and clog their throat. You know, there's challenges that face all of us as we grow up. And I want you to think about some of those challenges and what are the things that you might feel have sort of clogged your throat, right? What are the things that have prevented you from allowing that laughter and that joy to allow you to have the best experiences as you have grown up? This is a picture of where I grew up. I grew up in the Bronx. I grew up in the projects in the Bronx. This is actually now the Sonia Sotomayor houses. For those of you who know the Supreme Court Justice, the Latina Supreme Court Justice that was appointed in the Barack Obama administration. We grew up in the same area. I didn't know her, by the way, so, but I didn't even know we grew up into the same projects. But this was really an important point in my life because I grew up in these projects and I was born in 1967. I know some people are like, Jesus, did they have light back then? But, you know, I come from many of the same beginnings that people on this call probably come from, and many people in the St. Louis region come from. You know, my family didn't have a whole lot of money. I did have a mother and father when I grew up. I lived in this building for 7 years. You know, a lot of people in this that I know still live in these buildings, still struggle with the challenges that society has posed to them and the barriers that has put up for them. And I think the significant thing for me was while I grew up with two parents, when I was 7 years old, my parents got divorced. And I had a sister. She was 5 years older than me. Unfortunately, she passed away 2 years ago. And when my parents got divorced, my sister went to live with my father and I stayed with my mother. So I sort of grew up an only child after that. And in thinking about that quote and in thinking about, you know, going back to this whole idea of the small cruelties, you know, you don't necessarily think about it as cruelties, but my father, from the point that my parents got divorced, while he lived in the same borough as me, so think about somebody, your father and your mother splitting and, you know, living in still the same city or town, but you just never have a relationship with him. To the point where I did not like my father. I didn't know my father. I had closer relationships with my friends or people that I work with than with my father as my life went on. It was a couple of times where our paths crossed, but it just wasn't there, right? And so how does that shape you? How do you react to that? But my grandmother wound up raising me, which was really important. My grandmother grew up in the Jim Crow South. She only had an education up until the 9th grade, but one of the smartest people I know, because education isn't everything. And she came up to New York to make a life for herself because of the challenges and the barriers that Blacks faced in the South. She grew up specifically in North Carolina. And I wanted to spend a lot of my summers down in North Carolina, which sort of shaped me too. So how do we get out of the environments in which we live to explore and understand different places, right? How do you do that? How do you make sure that you don't have one lens, one way in looking at things? So I lived in New York City, largest city in the country, great city, very diverse, still a lot of challenges. But I got to spend time on farms, picking tobacco and peddling vegetables. And I got to see a little bit about racism in the South because there was some still remnants of that. But my grandmother was really the integral part of my life. Another part of my life, growing up life that really shaped my view and in my caring about children and families and the position I'm in now is that I went to 5 different elementary schools because I went to school near where my mother worked. So how do you foster relationships? I mean, I know there's a lot of challenges today because of social media with kids in school in general, but how do we manage those situations? How do we foster relationships? It was a challenge for me because I moved to so many different schools. But one thing it made me be able to do and to see is that the importance of making new friends, to make those new connections, to see people for who they are and not necessarily take to conscious too much how people see me. And so I guess the question once again would be, how do you navigate those challenges of different groups? Do you stay with the same group all the time? Do you think that's a good thing? Or is it important for kids and young people to be able to engage and immerse themselves into other groups? I started to value friendship a lot because of that. And that's probably also have driven me because I've often cared more about other people than myself. A lot of part of my life was about how do I give to other people? How do I help other people get the things they need? And maybe it was because I didn't have that, because of my family and because of my family situation. I did have it. I did have a loving mother and grandmother, but you always focus on what you don't have, right? Isn't that true? That we always focus on the things that we don't have instead of what we do have. It was never a day in my young life that I felt unloved, even with the challenges that were facing me. And I think that's important. That drove me as a father to make sure that my children felt unloved. And believe me, I was not a perfect parent. Parents aren't perfect, but I did my best to show love in the way that I could and that I knew how to. So, excuse me, another thing I'd say that helped me sort of get out of my shell and think about the world a little differently was that my mother, when I was in high school, she worked really hard, 2 jobs, to allow me to go on a school trip to Europe. I didn't know anything about Europe. I knew the Bronx. Matter of fact, I'll show you one of the pictures, of how I grew up. These are pictures of what I grew up. I mean, does it look familiar? In some ways, if you're from the St. Louis city, there was a lot of abandoned buildings. The Bronx, there was a lot of fires. I used to play in the street. I used to drink out of fire hydrants because that's what we did. So you have all this going around you, but isn't it normal when you grow up in those places? Don't we normalize it so that we don't see it as disadvantage necessarily? We may see that we look different or where we grow up looks different than other places. But going to the South for those summers, going to Europe, it really sort of made me realize that there is more than where I am and that there are other ways and there is hope for something better. And so that freedom of movement and that movement that I'm engaged in taught me how to connect with others. So how do you do that? How is that important? Is that something you think is important? And how do you do that? How do you connect with others? How do you make sure you get out of your immediate surroundings to understand more about others, which makes you understand more about yourself? So I want to talk about a little bit of my work time in the police department, but this is a Barack Obama quote that I thought was really important too. Change will not come if we wait for other people, or some other time. We are the ones we are waiting for. We have to be those people to make that change. How many people have ever been told, especially the young black people on this webinar, have been told that you have to work 10 times as hard to get to the same point or to have success? Because that's what I was told when I grew up, because it was true. And I think it's still true today. As a young black man and as a black man now, we're judged differently, unfortunately. It may be better now, but we are judged differently. I have locks now, right? I remember going to interview for jobs and worried about, should I cut my locks off? Because how do people view that? Are they going to take me serious as a professional because I have these? And I was even told I did get a position in the police department working in the police commissioner's office. And I got the job because I knew the person who headed it. It was a white gentleman who I knew really well. And after I got the job, his assistant, who was an older white gentleman, maybe about 6 months in, he wound up telling me that they debated a lot whether they either should ask me to cut my locks or whether they were going to accept me in that position because of my hair. Now they did, and it was probably because I knew the person who was leading it so well. But if I didn't know him, what would have happened? So this whole idea of like, we have to work harder. We have to think so much always about how we present, but you got to push through that. You can't allow that to stop you from trying, from pushing ahead, from questioning people, So what about you do you think you have to think about, or what about you do you think people are judging you around? What about your appearance? What about the way you talk? You can't allow that. We have to be that change. We have to push. So one of the other pictures I want to share, this is a young gentleman called Yusef Hawkins. He was shot to death in 1989 in an area of the Brooklyn in New York City called Bensonhurst, which was it was predominantly, overwhelmingly, probably 100% white, and it was mostly Italian American. So I don't know if you saw the movies Bronx Tale or oh my God, Goodfellas. This was that type of neighborhood. where you had a lot of people who were connected to organized crime. And so the mistake he made was that him and some friends went into Bensonhurst. They had a friend, a female friend who was white. This white mob thought he was dating a white woman. How dare he? And so they shot him to death. And the reason I bring this up is thinking back to those cruelties and thinking back to our life. So what ultimately resulted was, everybody I think knows Al Sharpton. This was sort of the beginning of Al Sharpton's activism. There was a lot of protests. Blacks went and marched through Bensonhurst. And I was a police officer at this time. He got killed about a month after I started. But the protests were a little later. So I wound up having to work these protests as a police officer, as a Black man, as a person who grew up in the city. And there was a lot of racism present. I mean, this picture here tells you, what is that? It's watermelon, right? Doesn't mean much, but you know why they have it? Because a bunch of Black people are marching through advocating for civil rights. So they're looking at it, they're using it in a racist way, because that's what they're dealing with, the Black people with watermelon, right? And so it was interesting to me when I think about what I do now and I think about my work. Imagine being someone that has to stand between this group of people and the group that are protesting and hearing racist remarks, the N-word flying back and forth, and protecting both sides, right? As a police officer, it's about making sure people can safely march and people can safely present their views. And I never thought of becoming a police officer, right? But my growing up and my experiences growing up framed a lot about how I was a police officer. I guess that's the best way to say it. And so I policed in many of the same communities that I grew up in, but I policed people that were facing the same circumstances that I grew up in, even though it wasn't necessarily my reality. I wasn't no longer living in the projects. I was living in a private house with my grandmother and my mother. But the thing that made me successful, I believe, is I never felt uncomfortable. The challenge with, I think, what we face in the world today is that for many reasons, when people engage people that don't look like them, that don't live in the same circumstances as them, they feel uncomfortable and they show it. And think about you, how do you feel if you're engaging someone who's not where you're from or doesn't look like you, and they visually are displaying discomfort with being around you or within the space in which you're in? How do you feel about that? And we need to think about that. And we need to think about that ourselves, because we don't want to, project that onto anyone. So I never felt uncomfortable because I was from those areas. I never judged anybody. I could talk the talk because I was from the community. And the people that were most important to me in those interactions as a cop early on, because I was a community police officer early on when it first started in New York, was children. Because children don't ask to be brought into the world. They don't get to choose their parents. If you think about it, we're all the result of a lottery. And I guess how you look at it determines whether you view us as yourself as a winner or a loser. But we all are a result of a lottery. We don't determine the city we're born in, the parents we're born to. And we need to think about that when we think about other people. And that's something I tried to bring when I was a police officer, that, people can't often just get up and move, as people say. Why do they live in that community? It's a lot of crime. Why don't they just get up and move? It's not that simple for most people, for the vast majority of people. So how do we help them should they have to move? How do we help them make that place where they live better? How do we work with them? How do we actually have a community? I was the first person in my family to go to college. I didn't last long because I was the first person in my family to go to college. So now you hear all those flowery degrees and all of that Naya shared with you. But in fact, I went to college, didn't pay any money because I was a single mother and she had low income. So I went on a scholarship. I lasted a year and a half. And I didn't wind up getting my bachelor's degree until I went to college in 85. I left in 87. I didn't get my bachelor's degree to 1999. It doesn't matter when you get it. You have to be ready. Don't let people make you feel like you should get it, or it is some time frame or some time when you have it. And once again, I'm saying all these things because this is what led me to the work that I do now. And I had my challenges as a young adult too. when I came home from college, I got somebody pregnant. That woman had a daughter already who was born with heart failure, who died a month before my daughter was born. So I know what it's like to also take advantage of services that help people, especially young women and with young children who experience those types of situations. I remember the month before my daughter was born, I spent a couple of nights in a Ronald McDonald house. I don't know if you guys know, Ronald McDonald houses are for people who don't have a lot of money, but have children with terminal illness who are staying in hospitals and just need to be close to them. And so I had that experience. I also had the experience of, I wasn't with that. I left, I wound up not being in a relationship anymore with that young lady, but I had my youngest daughter now, her mother, who was also an officer when she was 4 years old, took her own life with a gun. So I've had that experience too, in terms of how do now I'm a single parent, a single father with a young Black woman, young Black girl, who now I have to figure out what to do and how to raise her and have a career. You know, all of these things are what frame the importance of family to me and the importance of children to me. So my police career really, really shaped my life and my thinking. So this is a Booker T. Washington quote. Success is measured not so much by the position that one has reached in life as by the obstacles which he has overcome or she has overcome trying to succeed. What are those obstacles for you? And how do you let those obstacles that are put in front of you deter you or slow you down or make you turn around? Life isn't about the good times. I mean, I've told you a little bit about my own personal challenges and obstacles, but I have plenty more. It's not about how we do when things are going well. It's about how we respond to adversity. I'm sure you've heard that before. So when I got this position, you know, it was important for me to be that voice. I talked about we are the change we seek. I'm fortunately in a position in the mayor's office where I have that authority and ability to bring people to the table, but also to make sure I shine a light on racial equity, to make sure I challenge people to not just think that what they're doing is good enough, but we can do more and we can do better, to bring people together collaboratively, to say, if we all work together, we can reach more people, we can have a greater impact. That's what's important to me now. We have to make sure that we don't turn our backs or give up to say there's nothing that we can do. And I learned that from all those challenges that I had in my own personal life. I love rap. I grew up on rap. I'm from the Bronx, Sugar Hill Gang, all that stuff. I don't know how many of you know it. And I was looking at a lot of rap last night because art imitates life, right? But rap is really built on, from the time it began, people communicating the struggles that they have and what they experience or what Black people or the people that they grew up with are experiencing. And it's interesting how it really hasn't changed over time. A whole lot, it has a little bit. But I thought these lyrics were good. And so I wanted to share them. Even when my light burns low, I can never lose hope. I've never been down this road before. Now I know, I've been down this road before. Now I know which way to go. You can try to drag me down, but I'll be living in the clouds. Everybody has their doubts, but you can't stop me now. And I would ask you, what do those words mean to you? I mean, it means to me that, I never lose hope. Even when things are the toughest, I know I've been in those situations before and I've overcome them, or things have worked themselves out. And many people think you're crazy to be so optimistic all the time or live in the clouds, but you can't worry about what other people think. You have to think about yourself. And I would go back to the previous one about you define success for yourself. Don't let people define success for you. Success for me isn't a job making a whole lot of money, living in a big house and wearing a lot of jewelry. That's fine if that's someone else's success. Success isn't a college degree necessarily. What is success to you? And how do people make you feel about the way you define success? So I'll stop there. I appreciate you giving me the time to talk with you. Like I said, with you, not to you. I learn a lot every day. And, I wish you all the success, much success. And if you ever need anything, I'll make sure you have my contact information. So thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Pinckney. Thank you so much. There's a couple of questions. The first one is, what made you come to St. Louis from New York City?
I came to St. Louis for a fellowship. So as Naya said, I'm finishing a doctorate, and usually people who are doing doctors do some type of fellowship. So I looked online and found out there was an organization that was looking for people to come to St. Louis to work on bail reform and pretrial reform. And while I was a police officer, I do believe we shouldn't, where we can, we should make sure we don't lock people up, and we help people so that they don't get to the point where they need to be locked up. And so that's what brought me to St. Louis.
Okay. Another question. What, if anything, would you do differently if you were, let me reread it. What, if anything, would you do differently today as a police officer monitoring the protests back then? So I believe what they're asking is if what was happening today was happening then, because I guess there is some similarities in the protests that were happening in the 60s versus what's happening today. Is there anything that you would do differently if you were a police officer now, but back then?
I don't think so, because back then, even on the police department, and it was a lot of stuff going on in New York around race in the late 80s and early 90s. There was a lot of stuff around the country. I didn't talk about the Central Park 5 had happened, where a white woman had been raped in a Central Park, and these young black males got arrested and accused. But there was this whole roving band. You had Rodney King, you had the Washington Heights riot. I could talk about so many things. I know for me, because of my experience growing up, I always spoke out against that. So I didn't see a lot of cops engaging in racist talk around me, because it was clear that that was not how I rolled. And I wasn't going to allow people to talk and make light of it, make jokes of it. So I would do the same thing. I mean, I was a cop, so it wasn't like I was a decision maker, so I could make decisions about what we did. But I would say, maybe the thing I would do, because if I was speaking to my younger self, maybe I would have gotten more involved in the community to help show that I was that type of person on the police force, because not everybody believed that there were those types of police officers. So maybe, thank you, that's a great question, because I never really thought about it, but that's probably what I would do.
Okay, yes, that is so important, especially, today with the way policing is viewed, especially by people in the Black and Brown community. So that's a great point. Thank you. Another question, how long have you been doing what you do?
Well, in terms of this position, I've been doing it since September of 2019. In terms of consulting in general, I've been doing it since I retired. I've done a lot of work with nonprofits and all that. So since I retired from the police department in 2009, but I've continued to work with departments, not only nationally, but internationally. So that's been something else that helps me, because I get to see policing in very many different settings, because it's not the same everywhere. And I think that's important to make sure. We often bring the lens that we have, and we think everything is based on where we grew up and where we work. And you shouldn't go into communities with that attitude. You should be going in trying to understand the places in which you're going.
Thank you. Another question, how can young people now help cause positive change to law enforcement and criminal justice systems?
Oh, there's many ways. I think, first of all, good young people need to join the police department, so it's more representative and you have people with the right attitudes. I think young people should start and get involved in entrepreneurialism, start businesses, learn about how to start businesses to address the needs in community. I think young people should be working with nonprofits. Many of them don't think about it. Unfortunately, it's not a lot of money to be made in the nonprofit world, but those are the organizations that work on the ground in communities to provide services. I think they need to become more knowledgeable about how the government systems work, because many people have great ideas, but they don't know how to bring those ideas to action. So it's many ways that you could do it, and you should be outspoken, not in a confrontational way. When you see cops, you should engage them. You should talk to them, ask them what they know about your community. The thing we often do is we want to talk, and this is police, this is community, this is activists, but we don't listen. The first thing you should do when you meet somebody new is ask questions so that you understand who they are and where they come from. And then you can impart whatever knowledge or point of view you have.
That was a good answer. That was a great answer. I was taking notes for myself with that answer. Another question, what was the scariest racial moment for you as an officer?
Wow, that's a good question. I don't know if anyone was scary because, we have a lot of police officers, so you're always surrounded by people. I'd say just those Bensonhurst riots and the Crown Heights riots weren't as scary, but they hurt, right? I mean, it's a reality that you don't see all the time. I had been called the N-word where I lived. I mean, I didn't get into this, but a tenant in my grandmother's house, a white male, who got mad around what was going on, but he wasn't paying rent. He burnt the cross in front of my grandmother's house. I was leaving a basketball game when I was I think I was in the 8th grade. In the neighborhood that I lived at that point with my grandmother, it was a white neighborhood. I was leaving that game with my mother and my grandmother, and we walked out of the game. We won. I took a charge at the end. I'm gonna brag on myself a little bit, and we won the game. But as I was leaving, it was dark. There was some white kids hanging out in the park across the street from the school. There was 3 of us walked out the door, and they yelled out, "Hey, N-word, go home. Go back to where you belong." So those types of things, they're not scared. I guess maybe I'm a little crazy. I wasn't scared. I was angry. I was disappointed, I was hurt. And so just seeing those things, and I think seeing when I was walking the beat, this isn't overt racism, but seeing the Black people who lived in the community, how they lived, and then being in other communities that weren't Black, those are the things that really drove me to get my degree in public administration, because I wanted to learn about policy so that I could have an impact. And I wanted to understand why are our communities always the same way? No matter whether crime gets better or not, it's still the worst of the better communities. And so those are the things that how race really, and my interaction and engagement around race really drove me.
Okay.
Hey, good morning, middle school.
Sorry.
2 minutes until we switch, please. 2 minutes till we switch.
Okay. This question, Officer Hall, you may want to chime in on this one too. What does St. Louis need to do as a community to become a more equitable place where everyone feels they belong and has opportunity?
I think, and I'll let Officer Hall go last because he's from here and he'll finish it off better than I can. But just from my time here, I would say one thing is that we need to have a more positive message that things can get better. I don't know that I see enough of that. It seems like we are good at pointing out the challenges, but we don't give people, I don't know how much hope we're giving people. Another thing is to hold people accountable and have enough understanding of systems here. A lot of the work that I've done has been around racial equity and making the city specifically more racially equitable. It's really understanding where those inequities are and then driving hard to address those and hold people accountable to say, why aren't we doing X, Y, or Z? Why are these communities looking this way and others aren't? Who aren't we reaching and why? And so those are a couple of things, but I'll let Corporal Hall jump in.
One more time with the question, Dr. Payton.
What does St. Louis need to do as a community to become a more equitable place where everyone feels they belong and has opportunity?
I think, and since I'm a police officer, I think it's one of the big things that can be done is PD involvement. Okay. I like to brag about our police department here in Maplewood. We are very diverse. We have, we have Asian officers. We have several Black police officers. We very, very diverse police department. It represents our community well. And we do a lot of outreach. We have a unit. We have a lot of homeless in our area right now in our city. And we have a unit that we actually go out, we make contact, with the homeless, you know, especially with the weather's been the way it's been, trying to provide shelter and things like that for the homeless. So I think the PD involvement is a good start, okay, in light of everything that's going on. And also just setting up different resources for, I would say, minorities so that they can establish some type of financial stability in their small, areas and communities. I think that's important as well. I think I'll say that's two big things or two issues that I feel like need to be addressed.
And I'd say it's about to Corporal's point, it's about relationships in the end, whether it's with the police or with community organizations or with government leaders. Unless we create better relationships, then it's not going to get better. And that burden on that is for everyone, not just any one person.
I agree with that.
Okay, and looks like we have one last question. Do you think racism is learned? And if it is, can people unlearn it? That's a
It
great
is
question.
learned, definitely. I mean, no kid is born, just like no kid is born bad, right? I mean, we have unfortunately a lot of young people engaging in criminal activity all across the region. They weren't born with that. They weren't doing that when they were 5 years old, right? They weren't thinking about that. So it is learned. I think it all comes back to, you'll hear the term socialization, right? Who are the groups that kids are connected to? Sometimes it's unlearned for individuals. I grew up in a predominantly Italian neighborhood where my sister's boyfriend got beat to a pulp coming to visit us because Black people weren't supposed to be walking up in there. But the white people took care of me because I was there, and I wasn't, when they said use the N-word or talked about Black people, I wasn't one of those people, right? I was different because they knew me. And so that's where it goes back to relationships, right? Again, because, we got to humanize ourselves to each other. And that's how the only way it can be unlearned. Some people aren't going to unlearn it. They're going to just be racist their whole life. But the only way you can get it unlearned is about relationships and about engaging people.
Okay. Well, thank you. I want to say thank you, everyone, for submitting your questions. Thank you, Mr. Pinckney, for sharing your experience with us and answering our questions. On behalf of MRH, I would like to also thank you for your service as a member of the New York City Police Department and now your service to the youth and families in St. Louis. It is so important to foster relationships with others. You alluded to that earlier, especially now when there has been so much tension between citizens, families, community, and police, especially given the history of policing, and the effects of that, particularly on Black Americans. It's clear that you were raised, the way you were raised, your personal morals, your ethics, your values have all shaped the way you have and continue to approach your work with families and communities. It's also clear that you have been the change you want to see and you encourage that. So thank you again. I now have the pleasure of introducing Ben Cummings, who will share his personal story about our school resource officer, Hall. Go ahead, Ben.
Hi there, everyone. Growing up, I've always questioned things like the police system, from personal interactions, the unfortunate things we see on the news and sometimes don't even hear about. Like I said, I question things. But I do not question the fact that the police system, the betterness, the well-being of the police system starts with officers like Officer Hall. When I met Officer Hall, I learned that not all officers contribute to the broken parts of the police system, that not all officers are bad. Officer Hall is a man who has every ounce of my respect, who has helped me throughout some of the hardest times in my life when I struggled and needed guidance most. More than anything, he's like a father to me. The same man who is like a father to me is also an officer. I believe that there are good police out there, that the good police are like Officer Hall, who are people who reach out in all parts of the community. And that's why we award you the award for change and the impact you have on students. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Officer Hall, we want to recognize you today. I'm going to stop using Officer Hall after today because I am pleased to announce Officer Hall is now Corporal Hall. He earned a promotion recently. I'm also saddened, though, to say that he'll be leaving the building on March 5th of this year to completely take on the responsibilities and the role in his new position as corporal. So we want to recognize Corporal Hall today for his commitment, his service to the students, to the families, and the community of MRH. Thank you for being more than just an officer, as Ben just mentioned, in all of our buildings. You have been a mentor, a confidant, a protector, a servant, and a friend to all of us here. You will definitely be missed, although we know you'll still be around from time to time. We wish you the best of luck and tons of future promotions. Thank you so much for all of your service.
Well, thank you all. The first thing I want to say is good job to Mr. Pinckney. I believe that was a really good speech. Well said. Benjamin, thank you for the kind words. I appreciate it. You know, you're my guy. I appreciate you guys. You guys are awesome. I'm going to miss everybody here. I'm going to miss the MRH staff. I think I can speak for all police officers when I say, you know, we don't do this for the awards or the acknowledgement or anything like that. We do it because it's a necessity, right? One of my jobs is, I feel like as an SRO, is to bridge the gap between law enforcement and the youth in light of everything that's going on. I think that's very important. Also, just allow these kids to know that, you know, you can confide in law enforcement. You know, you guys can trust us. All police officers are not the same, right? But we are all human. You know, it's about, like Mr. Pinckney said, you know, it's relationship building. You know, we have to build a rapport with one another. So I feel like that's very important, and that's my job, especially in this position. Now, with that being said, you know, I do appreciate the recognition today. You guys recognizing me, I really do. You guys will be missed, and again, thank you.
Awesome. Well, it's my job to close this out, but before I do, I want to reiterate some of the notes I took from Mr. Pinckney's speech today. Success is measured by obstacles we overcome while trying to succeed. That's from Booker T. Washington, which Mr. Pinckney referenced. And here's some quotes directly from Mr. Pinckney. I love it when he said, I learn a lot from everybody. We're always learning from somebody. He also said, you define success for yourself, not somebody from the outside. You decide that. He said, never lose hope. You're not crazy to be optimistic. The first thing you do when you meet somebody, remember this one? He said, ask them questions, get to know them. Because in the end, it's all about relationships, and we have to humanize ourselves for each other. Those are beautiful sentiments. We are grateful for our special guest, Mr. Pinckney. I want to also thank Dr. Payton for her hard work putting this together. I want to thank Ed Rich, Dr. Dietrich, Naya, Ben, Corporal Hall, and of course, Mr. Pinckney. And we thank all of you out there who are watching now or who will watch later. Thank you so much. Love everybody. Thanks for watching and have a great day.